I should like 75%.
Coffee apparently is
What are you? All right, good evening. Welcome to our town hall tonight. Just some information before we get started. This device right here is enabling us to stream this event. So there will be some people joining us online, and they'll be asking questions as well. But this way, they can participate, and you can also. How loud do you need my voice to get? Can you hear me in the back? Excellent. Okay. We're going to be leading this tonight, Tammy and I. I'm the pastor here at Mount UMC. I see a couple of faces I don't know, so welcome. Tammy is our lay leader. Excuse me. Tammy's our lay leader here, and she has been doing a phenomenal job for a couple years now as our lay leader. So we are here tonight to talk about human sexuality and LGBTQ inclusion in the United Methodist Church, the creation of the Global Methodist Church, and what role we have to play in it here at Mount UMC. So I'm going to ask Tammy to lead us in an opening prayer, and then we're going to get started.
Will you pray with me? Father God, we come here tonight as your children. I pray for a spirit of calm, that we will listen with both ears, with open hearts and minds, to hear what one another would say, that we would ask the questions that we are pondering. I thank you, Lord, for Pastor Will, for his leadership and for his willingness to listen and to guide during this time. In the name of your Son, Jesus, amen.
All right, so just so you know, on your seats there are just a single sheet for questions. We're going to collect those questions later on, and I presume we're going to have some questions that pop up throughout the meeting. So if that comes to your mind, just write it down. That's going to help you so you don't forget what you wanted to ask. Okay, so just as a way of starting, the United Methodist Church is organized by a thing called General Conference. General Conference meets every 4 years, and they are tasked with several things. They elect leaders for the General Church. They adopt a budget for the General Church, and by General Church, I mean the church from Albuquerque to Albania. They affirm plans for the shared ministry of the Global Connection. They revise the principles that we go by. So what do we believe about certain social issues? And they revise the Book of Discipline. So the Book of Discipline is the guiding document which determines how we do church on a very practical level. So they do a lot of things. And one of the things that they're tasked with is this question: what do we as United Methodists affirm around human sexuality? They met last in 2019. They were scheduled to meet in 2020, but 2019 was a called general conference around specifically human sexuality. They met, I believe, in St. Louis, Missouri, and they were tasked with these three things. This was all they were supposed to meet about. They were tasked with figuring out how to have full inclusion of persons who are LGBTQ. Now that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. So I'll be using that acronym later on and throughout. They were tasked with ordination of persons who are LGBTQ, and whether or not we as Methodists would ordain persons who identify as gay, straight, or gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and lesbian. And they were tasked with figuring out whether clergy could officiate over same-gender weddings. So, what did they do? Well, in 2019, in a very narrow vote, they voted to keep the language as it is, and Tammy's going to explain what the language is in our Book of Discipline. Keep the language as it is, but also to add offenses to a pastor who officiates a gay wedding, and offenses to someone who identifies as LGBTQ. And these offenses are that if I were to officiate a gay wedding, I would be put on probation on my first offense. On my second offense, I would be stripped of my clergy credentials. So, Tammy, I'm going to ask for you to come on up and explain what do we currently affirm in our Book of Discipline around LGBTQ inclusion.
So this is the language in the Book of Discipline as it currently stands. The United Methodist Church acknowledges that all persons are of sacred worth, all persons without regard to race, color, national origin, status, or economic condition shall be eligible to attend its worship services, participate in its programs, receive the sacraments, upon baptism be admitted as baptized members, and upon taking vows declaring the Christian faith, become professing members in any local church in the connection. While persons set apart by the church are ordained While persons set apart by the church for ordained ministry are subject to all the frailties of the human condition and the pressures of society, they are required to maintain the highest standards of holy living in the world. The practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. Therefore, self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates, ordained as ministers, or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church. So what we are left with is understanding what the Book of Discipline says with how compatible we are with the words that is in the Book of Discipline. So what I'm going to read to you now are 4 statements that has been helpful for people to give language to where they stand. The first is a progressive incompatibilist. Unless the church allows gay and lesbian people to marry inside the walls of the church, and unless the church allows for gay and lesbian pastors, I'm out. The next is a traditional incompatibilist. Unless the church disallows gay and lesbian people to marry inside the walls of the church, and unless the church disallows gay and lesbian pastors, I'm out. Next is progressive compatibilist. God's gay and lesbian children should be able to marry in the church, and they can serve as pastors. However, I can be in a church where others disagree with me. And finally, we have the traditional compatibilist. Marriage is between a man and a woman. Pastors may only be married to other gender, not in a same gender marriage. However, I can be in a church where others disagree with me. So what you may have noticed is that a compatibilist says, I can do this because this is a smaller thing for me, whereas an incompatibilist says, I can't do this thing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask you 3 questions. This is a silent poll. This is one for you to ponder in your mind and in your heart, just to kind of gauge where you are. So this is the first question. Would you be able to stay in the United Methodist Church if they did same-gender marriages inside the walls of churches? I'll try to speak louder. Thank you. So the first question, would you be able to stay in the United Methodist Church if they did same-gender marriages inside the walls of churches? The second question, would you be able to stay in the United Methodist Church if gay and lesbian pastors were ordained? And the third question, if the United Methodist Church allowed clergy to perform same-gender weddings, would you require all clergy to do so?
So I find that framework of incompatibilists and compatibilists very helpful. So as Tammy said, an incompatibilist says, say I'm a progressive incompatibilist, I will only stay in a church that ordains gay pastors and officiates gay weddings. While a traditional incompatibilist says, I will only stay in a church that doesn't ordain gay pastors and doesn't officiate gay weddings. So it says, I've got these certain strictures in my life. I've got a certain mores in my life that I abide by, and this includes that. Likewise on a traditional side. And there are also compatibilists, people who say, I believe that God's children can be gay and lesbian, and they're of sacred worth, and they can be ordained, and they can be married inside the walls of a Methodist church. But if our church says they can't be, I can stay in that church. It's a smaller thing for me that I can stay in that church. Or I'm a traditional compatibilist where I believe that gay people should not serve as pastors and gay people should not be married by United Methodist pastors. But I can stay in a church that affirms that gay people can be married and gay persons can be pastors. People may ask me, and maybe one of your questions tonight is, what do I as the pastor predict for our church? Well, I would venture to say that 95% of us fall somewhere in that compatibilist columns. That we have a fair share of people who are traditional compatibilists, who, if the Methodist Church voted to begin ordaining gay pastors and officiating gay weddings, they could still stay in that church. They don't like it, it's not their preference, but they could stay there. And I predict that on the other side, there are those who are progressive compatibilists in our church, who, truth be told, have been in a traditional church for years. Because since 1972, we've not affirmed homosexuality as compatible with Christian teaching. So my guess is, in our church right now, as it stands, 95% of us are either traditional or traditional or progressive compatibilists. But that is to say that I believe, and I know on one end, there are progressive incompatibilists who are not here anymore because of 2019. And if the Methodist Church were to move towards a more progressive side of things, there would be traditional incompatibilists who would say, I'm out. I've got to leave. This matters so much to me. I've got to go. So that's helpful to me, thinking about those four different quadrants as I think about who I am and what I believe around this issue. And we'll get to that later on tonight. Because I think ultimately all of us in 2022 know someone who is gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or queer. And they may be a son, a daughter, an uncle, an aunt, a friend. So I think it does take it from that theoretical, what do I, to, well, what about Jill, or what about Sarah, or whomever. My prediction for the United Methodist Church. So you may have heard, and we're going to talk about the Global Methodist Church tonight. My prediction for the United Methodist Church is, with the creation of this more traditional denomination, that it will cause the percentage of people who are progressive to increase. As I said, in 2019, they voted to strengthen the language around homosexuality in the church. With the departure of many traditionalists, I believe that the Methodist Church will move towards, in 2024, loosening the language around homosexuality. So that's my prediction, but I'm just one person. Okay, so as I said, the Global Methodist Church was created May 1st. It is a brand new denomination. It is a traditional denomination, and according to their promotional materials, they believe themselves to be more in line with what John Wesley wanted for a Methodist church. And so some of you have heard of and are interested in disaffiliation. Now, disaffiliation would be to take Rocky Mount United Methodist Church out of the United Methodist Church. It could do what Pleasant Hill did. Pleasant Hill disaffiliated from the United Methodist Church a couple years ago, before the creation of the Global Methodist Church, and it could be an independent church. Some of you have heard about disaffiliation and then affiliating with the Global Methodist Church. So let me tell you how that would work. It would begin with contacting our district superintendent, Denise Bates, used to serve Redwood UMC, just east of us. She would come and give an orientation meeting for how a church disaffiliates. We would begin then a 30-day period of prayerful, intentional discernment to align the congregation with God's purpose for this church. Then, after those 30 days were over, disaffiliation would then require a 2/3 vote of a church conference. Now, a church conference is everybody who is a professing member of Rocky Mount UMC in attendance. So anyone who is in attendance and is a member can vote. 2/3 would have to vote for us to leave the United Methodist Church. And then finally, all approvals and agreements would have to be completed 30 days before a called annual conference. Now that's everybody in Virginia, in our Virginia annual conference, would say, Rocky Mount, yes, you may leave, according to this agreement and all the parts of that. Now, some questions that you may have about that. What would happen to apportionments for our local congregations that remain in the United Methodist Church? So say 100 churches leave Virginia, the Virginia Annual Conference, and join some other denomination. We believe that most churches will stay in Virginia, but what about us, Rocky Mount? Are we supposed to now pay for all of the 100 churches that left the conference? Would that cause our apportionments to go up? According to the Virginia Annual Conference, they will hopefully control costs and minimize the need for any apportionment increases. Another question you may have: how long is this form of disaffiliation? So this way of disaffiliating is only for a limited time. It's only until December 31st, 2023. After that point, there will not be a format for disaffiliation. They'll have to figure out a new one. You may ask, what does it cost to disaffiliate? Well, the churches that disaffiliate are required to pay the pensions that they have promised to pay. So, not too long ago, we had pastors who were promised a certain amount of pensions. And so those churches that are leaving have to continue to pay that pension. We're going to share the pensions between the Global Methodist Church and the United Methodist Church. Those promised pensions have to be paid. Those who disaffiliate will have to pay the previous year and the following year's apportionments. So they've got to pay that in order to leave. So that's what it costs, because what they would be getting, is the property and the church building. So it is there is some cost to disaffiliate. The question is, would we get the building and the properties if we disaffiliated? Yes. Once the disaffiliating local church has reimbursed the applicable annual conference for funds due under the agreement, and provided that there are no other outstanding liabilities or claims against the UMC, in consideration to the provisions of the guiding paragraph in the Book of Discipline, they may be released and receive their property and land. Okay. We're going to ask if you've got questions to write them down. We're going to take a little bit of time to write down the questions that you may have. And as you're doing that, I'm going to take a look at, or you can take a look at the computer and see if there's any questions there. So just take a couple of minutes or a minute. We're going to write down any questions you have, and we'll see if we can answer those questions.
And I'll start taking questions. All right, so I'm going to take these questions just as I get them, because I don't have a way of organizing them right now. The first one I received was, what will the Methodist Church be called? So the Methodist Church will continue to be called the United Methodist Church. There are plenty, yes?
Isn't it kind of ironic to call it United, all we're meeting for that was split up?
No, because it was created by uniting. So when the evangelical brethren united with the Methodist Church. Yeah.
We're no longer united. That's the point. I realize it's very basic with the name, but it's what seems to be not applicable at all.
I would disagree. I think it, but I get your point. I get the point. It would continue to be called the United Methodist Church. Is there a timeline for the division? These, as I said, this protocol or way of doing things is until December 31st, 2023. So any church that wishes to disaffiliate under this guideline in the discipline has until that date to move forward under that guideline. After 2023 is over, I predict there will be some other way of doing it, but this was set in place by the 2019 General Conference as to how a church may disaffiliate. And our Virginia Annual Conference is using that paragraph in the Book of Discipline as its guiding protocol. Next question: have protocols been established to before the separation?
Yeah.
Okay. Have protocols been established to before the separation? Again, I think that's that paragraph that I'm mentioning. I think it's, let me make sure I know which one it is. It's 2553. It's paragraph 2553 in the Book of Discipline, that guiding document. That's the established protocol for a separation. You're welcome to read it. It's actually not that long. It's only 4 or 5 different paragraphs. So you're welcome to read it. It gives basically what I've shared tonight, but a little bit more detail on how that. The question is, what does the Bible say? Unfortunately, the Bible was written before the United Methodist Church was around, but that, I think, is a whole nother night. And that's a sermon series is what that is. What does the Bible say? Well, it depends on what part of the Bible you are going to. It is an excellent question, but beyond the breadth of tonight's conversation. When I look at Scripture, I think a lot back to my time in seminary, and I was taught that there is the Bible within the Bible. So what is the core part of the Bible for me? To love God and love your neighbor as yourself. For you, you may find your core somewhere else. It could be in the cross, in the resurrection. It could be in the ascension. It could be in Genesis and the creation story. It could be in the law of Moses. It could be in the prophets. It could be in the beauty of the Psalms. It could be in the Song of Songs. You've got to answer that question for yourself. What does the Bible say? Let's read the Bible and notice that it is in conversation with itself, and it's in conversation with you. Excellent question. Excellent question. I like that question. All right, please explain one more time what the Global Methodist Church is. Okay. A few years ago, a group called the Wesleyan Covenant Association was created. One of its leaders is a former UMC pastor here in the state of Virginia. It was a group that comes out of the Good News organization, which is a traditional organization within the United Methodist Church. They were established because they were troubled by the United Methodist Church not applying its guidelines. You may know that right now in the western jurisdiction, so that's basically anywhere west of Iowa, west of Texas, the western part of the U.S., Hawaii, Alaska. They currently have a lesbian bishop. So they were upset because, well, we have this language around human sexuality that is incompatible with Christian teaching. How can we have a lesbian pastor, now bishop, leading thousands of United Methodists? So they were created, and they said, look, we just need to follow our protocol. After that, in conversation, they realized after 2020's General Conference was postponed due to COVID, to 2021, which was postponed due to COVID. And after this one was postponed, they said, we're not getting anywhere. We want to be out, so we're going to create a denomination called the Global Methodist Church, which, for all that they say that they are a traditional denomination in regards to human sexuality. So, as I said earlier, they believe themselves to be more in keeping with John Wesley creating class meetings, band meetings. They are going to have term limits on bishops. They're going to have non-guaranteed appointments. As an elder, I get an appointment, even if I'm a terrible, non-fruitful pastor. They believe that they're going to have a stripped-down bureaucracy. They believe themselves to be more mission-focused than the United Methodist Church. Again, that's their words. I'm just trying to honor what they say about themselves. But it is a new denomination, a new Wesleyan denomination. Okay, is this an either-or situation? We must choose one. You do not have to take a vote. If you take no vote, you remain a United Methodist. If you as an individual have problems with the United Methodist Church, there's a great way to leave the United Methodist Church, and that's just not to show up. That's to disaffiliate yourself. Hopefully, you will receive a phone call from myself and other people in the church saying, where in the world are you? But as a church, we do not have to take a vote on anything. In fact, the Virginia Annual Conference wants us to stay in the Virginia Annual Conference as a United Methodist. Is this an either-or situation? I also want to speak to that question, and I appreciate that question, because I want to share something really quickly. I joined the United Methodist Church largely because we are a big tent church. I love you, and I love that we have Republicans and Democrats. We have pro-lifers, pro-choicers here. I love that we've got people with graduate degrees and people without any degrees. I love that we've got poor and rich. I love that about our church, and I love that about this church. So this either-or dichotomy is very dangerous, because one of the things that draws me and maybe draws you to our church is that we can have this conversation about theology, and at the end of the day, not agree. I think that's beautiful. So, all right, next question. Tam, if you want to jump in on any of these questions, feel free.
Will do.
Okay.
You're doing great, Will.
All right. If the church determines a, quote, progressive path, will there be local option? Will there be a local option? Yeah, I think that's disaffiliation. If you are saying, I don't want our church to go down that route of a progressive church, then you would say, Pastor, we need... Yes, sir.
I asked that question.
Okay.
Clarification. I was in the Episcopal Church where I come from. The church is recognizing gay marriage, but it's up to the pastor and the congregation whether they will allow that to happen within the church.
Okay.
That's what I mean by local.
Okay.
We have to, you know.
Okay. So for those at home, so I'm going to try and restate what you said. You come from an Episcopal church which, when they recognized gay pastors and gay weddings in the Episcopal church, your question is, does the local church have any sort of sway or input on whether or not this church has a gay pastor and has gay weddings inside the walls of it? Am I right or wrong?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Right now, for instance, when I came here, when Bruce came here, when Bill Dawson came here, when Larry House, we trust that our denomination and our bishop does the due diligence of matching the person to the place. Bruce, I would figure that, was it Kammerer when you were sent here? When Bishop Kammerer sent Bruce here out of retirement, she had a vision for this church that he was the right person for the time. When I was sent here, when Bishop Cho sent me to this congregation, I trust that he had me in mind as the right person for this time at Rocky Mount. Likewise, the SPR, the Staff Parish Relations Committee, in consultation with the DS, said, hey, we need this kind of person at this time, or we need this kind of person at this other time. They'd fill out a church profile every year. They'd fill it out, saying our church needs this or our church needs that. I would guess, Bob, that as this process continues, those churches that are more traditional will not be sent a gay pastor, if that ever happens, okay? They don't want to match the wrong person to the wrong place because it just ends up bad for both parties. Now, you also asked a question about can a local church have a local option about officiating gay weddings within the walls of the church. I really don't know that. But I will tell you this. I am never forced, and I've never been forced to officiate a wedding that I don't choose to officiate. If a couple presents themselves as totally unmatched for each other, I will say, I'm not doing this wedding. I'm not going to do this wedding. I have my own morals about that. If a couple presents themselves in that way, I won't do that. So I have a local option. I would presume that the church does, but again, that's yet to be determined about that. Okay. What else we got?
I had one more, and I think you may have already addressed that.
Okay, can you clarify, is the Wesley traditional vote staying or disaffiliating? Yeah, so it is no vote. There does not have to be a vote if you want to stay in the United Methodist Church. Right now, and until 2024, the language is, we believe that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, and we do not ordain gay pastors. That cannot change unless General Conference changes it, and that won't be until 2024. Okay. Flesh out the difference between orientation and participation and levels of acceptance. Flesh out the difference between orientation. Are we talking about orientation of gay and lesbians or participation Okay, I'll try my best with what I've got. All right, so right now, there are persons who are serving in the United Methodist Church who are gay, but are not self-avowed homosexuals. So there are those who are oriented towards homosexuality or being a lesbian who are not declared or out. So I know of one pastor who is in that place, and he continues to serve. He is not living with anyone. He is not married to anyone, but he is not out to his church, presumably. So I hope that answers that. Maybe it doesn't. Okay. There was a question on the live stream.
I got it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, let's read it. Let's see what it is.
You did. That was one I gave.
Oh, okay, excellent. All right, some myths that I just want to affirm tonight. A myth: you have to take a vote. You do not have to take a vote. We will continue to do our ministry as we have done it for all these hundreds of years here. A myth: a church can make their own decisions about general church choices. No, the General Conference makes that decision. So what we believe about homosexuality is guided by the General Church. Now, you have your own individual beliefs, but as a church globally, we have guidelines, and those are set by the General Conference. Clergy who are traditional are going to be punished. This is something my DS has expressed to me multiple times. If I'm traditional and I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, and if I believe I'm going to be punished for that belief, that's just an out-and-out lie. We have plenty of traditional pastors in our denomination. We have plenty of progressive pastors, neither of which are going to be punished for their beliefs. And lastly, a myth. RNUMC is asking you to, the conference is asking RNUMC to disaffiliate. To be clear, no one's asking for disaffiliation. The purpose of tonight was to be informational and to dispel any rumors that you may have had. Okay. Before we get to this last part, Tammy, let's ask for any other questions that you've got or anything else you want to say tonight.
I just wanted to ask one question when you said narrowly. And I've been told that it was from the African nations. Could you clarify that?
Okay. So back in 2019 at the last General Conference, Becky, you're right. This is a conference of United Methodists from across the globe. And in Africa, where United Methodism is growing, there was a sizable group of people who came to to General Conference and voted for the more traditional understanding around human sexuality. It was a narrow vote because in the United States, the majority of those delegates voted for loosening the language, but the delegates from Africa, a large part of our delegation, voted for the more conservative. So that's correct. And I saw today in reading the Global Methodist Church, many of those African conferences are wanting to leave the United Methodist Church and go with a Global Methodist Church. So that's a good point. Any other questions or thoughts tonight? Yes, ma'am.
Well, if you happen to go to globals, then how do you go pastor? I mean, how does that work?
Right. So presumably some pastors in the United Methodist Church are going to leave, and they're going to affiliate with the Global Methodist Church, and then they'll be appointed inside the Global Methodist Church. But that's a fair concern, because one of the great things about Methodism is you're guaranteed a pastor to be sent. You're not calling a pastor like a Baptist church is. You're being sent one. So you're hoping that if you join the Global Methodist Church that you're going to get a pastor. But again, that's...
But they're still considered Methodists. All of them are still considered Methodists.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Still within that Wesleyan tent. Because, we're all coming back to that Wesleyan tent, like the Free Methodist, the African Methodist Episcopal, African Methodist Episcopal Zion. These are all Wesleyan churches. So we are Methodist, but doctrinally some differences. So, Yes, ma'am.
Do you predict that after the next call general conference that the wording will loosen, therefore more churches will have an inclusive wording that they have to follow?
Okay, her question was, do I predict after the next general conference whether the wording will be loosened? And yes, I do. I do, because of what I spoke to on Becky's point, that with the loss of those United Methodists from Africa, that will sway more towards the progressive side of things. And that could then hasten more conservatives to leave the United Methodist Church. It's very possible. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So I thought it'd be helpful to hear from your lay leader and what she believes about this, and to hear from me. So I'm going to ask Tammy to speak first.
So I, for almost my entire adult life, have worked with churches and church leaders across all different denominations. My scope of God's church is not just United Methodist Church. It's the Big C church. And we disagree about a lot, about a lot of different things. There's just a lot of disagreement. But that's what I think about, is the global Big C church. And we all hold to Christ. And that is what is important to me, that we're together with those that love Jesus and desire to learn about him and become more like him. And that's the church that I embrace, is the Big C church, and I'm happy to be a part of Rocky Mount United Methodist Church.
And as I think about what I believe around this, I embrace that big tent idea of United Methodism. It's very appealing to me in a culture which embraces division and people going to their different corners. Sort of what I spoke about after Uvalde, just the idea that we have to choose our corners. I love about United Methodist that I don't agree with y'all, and y'all don't agree with me, but we can share a conversation about these things that we don't agree on. And this is one of those things that I appreciate about our church, that we're not one thing or the other. We're inclusive of these theological disparities. So that's something I love, and that's something I embrace as I think about this. And I hope that we would consider that. And I also want to share one more thing, and I think this is important. I am going to be very light touch on this. This is not my church. I'm not even a member of this church. So as you discern and as you talk to one another, this is your church. This is a decision that you all will make. So I'm not here to force you or coerce you into my point of view. It is merely to be with you as you journey through it. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight, for taking time out of your week to be here tonight. If you've got more questions or things that you would much rather speak to me on a one-on-one basis than in a town hall meeting, I do hope you'll reach out to me, and I'm sure Tammy would welcome you as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Are there any other questions on there, just so we can cover our bases?
Nope, we are good.
Okay. Let's bow for a word of prayer as we close. Thank you, God, for our time tonight. Lord, I thank you for the engagement of this group, and I pray, Lord, that you will continue to lead us and guide us as we discern the next best path. Help us, God, as we live alongside one another. Remind us of the shared humanity and the shared brotherhood and sisterhood that we all have underneath Christ. Give us in this hour wisdom. Give our leaders of our denomination wisdom. Give wisdom to those leading this new denomination, and all those, God, that we are called to serve. May we continue to seek out and live into a place that is about Christ and his ministry and mission for each and every one of us. In his name I pray. Amen. Thank you for being here.